Hello, and thank you for joining us at Coalesce. My name is Anna Filipova, and I head up community here at DBT Labs. I'll be the host of today's session. The title of the session is Down with Data Science, and we'll be joined by the very esteemed Emilie Schario. Emilie is currently the data strategist in residence with Amplify Partners, and that means she has one of the coolest jobs ever. She gets to work with many different early stage startups and help shape their data strategy as they grow. You might also know her from her prior role at Netlify, where she led data and business intelligence, or her time consulting on internal data strategy at GitLab. Last year, she brought us one of the most memorable talks of the conference, why you should run your data team like a product team. And today, she's about to shift our understanding of roles on data teams. Are you ready for this? A gentle reminder that all chat conversation is taking place in the Coalesce Down Data Science channel of the DBT Community Slack. Please do ask other attendees questions, make comments, or react at any point in the channel. Also, remember to use Slack threads to keep the conversation tidy. After the session, Emilie will hang around in the Slack channel to answer your questions, so throw them in the chat anytime, and we'll make sure to come back to them. Get started. Over to you, Emilie.
Thanks, Anna. I'm so happy to be here. I don't know if you can tell, but my excitement is like physically palpable. I'm so honored to be speaking at Coalesce again on day 2. It's the DBT community has meant so much to me and my career. And so being able to be a part of this, to be a part of the community, to be part of Coalesce is just so meaningful to me personally. I'm really excited to convince everyone here today that we need to get rid of this phrase data science, and I hope you'll stick around on this journey with me. I do want to echo, please do join the Slack channel. After this, I have time carved out today and probably for the rest of the week where I'm going to be going and engaging with you all in Slack. So I really want to start a conversation here today. A little bit about me. Like Anna mentioned, I'm currently a data strategist in residence at Amplify Partners. I was previously director of data at Netlify. Prior to that, I was the first data analyst at GitLab and a couple of other companies. I've gotten to work with a variety of organizations. I use she, her pronouns. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what science is, and then we'll talk about what data scientists are, or what data science is and what data scientists do. We'll talk about the work that data teams are doing, the core 4 roles that you should have on your data team, career paths, and how at the end of the day, this is all about leveling up the data profession. So let's start with this question. What is science? Hopefully you're racking your brain now to like elementary school or high school or that freshman year biology class. And the great thing is for all of us that we have search engines that can help us come up with really great definitions here. So Wikipedia came through and told me that science is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the universe. Or, to put it more simply, science is a systematic enterprise for obtaining knowledge through testable explanations and predictions. And when you read this definition, hopefully what comes to mind is the scientific method. We see something, we research what already exists about it, we form a hypothesis, we actually experiment on this, we analyze data, and then we share our conclusions, and that should draw and create another question. And when Alexis Johnson Gresham and Caitlin Moorman published this blog post on linear and circular data projects in 2020, I think this is what they were getting at. Some projects are clear, cut and dry. There's a start and an end. We did the thing, you check it off. And then their work actually leads to new questions, and that's the circular piece. And so what we've heard so far, what we've read, what we've talked about in science is that science is experimentation. And so my question is, do the people who hire data scientists know that? I did what any reasonable person here would do, and I went to the DBT jobs board. And I asked the DBT jobs board, you have a data science category. Tell me, what do data scientists do? So I looked at this job description, and I've blacked out the company name here for protecting the innocent, let's say. But do you see experimentation on here? I see optimize. build and refactor pipelines, build visualizations, no experimentation. Maybe it's a fluke. Let's look at another. Oh, I see statistics right there. Uses appropriate statistical. Weird. No experimentation. We said science is experimentation. So do the data scientists know that? Josh Wills, a very esteemed member of the DBT community, says that a data scientist is a person who is better at statistics than any software engineer and better at software engineering than any statistician. Okay. Where's experimentation? And then there's this blog post from Lyft where they say, and we can read this together, at Lyft, we're rebranding our data analyst function as data scientists. So a data scientist is a data analyst. Okay. And when we think about the kinds of work that data teams do, we have operational analytics, metrics management, data insights, servicing other people, and yes, experimentation reporting. And experimentation is a part of what data teams do, but it's not the only thing that data teams do. And the thing, folks, is that words matter, language matters, and yes, job titles too, they matter. I shared this meme earlier in the year on building a data team in 2021. And as the year comes to a close and we roll into 2022, all of this is still true. And so people think building a data team is pulling a number real fast, but there are all these things that happen under the hood. And one of them, the one that's relevant for us today, is standardizing on the definition of customer. We know that standardizing on the definition of customer is important because when someone says, how many customers do we have? You don't want to reply, do you mean accounts, teams, or users? And so we know that words matter in the context of our work. And so word, language, job titles matter in the context of our own roles. So before we go into solutioning, let's take a step back and say, what is the purpose of the data team? And I say that it's to help the organization make better decisions. And this was our mission at Netlify, the data team mission at Netlify. The data team exists to empower the entire organization to make the best decisions possible by providing accurate, timely, and useful insights. And here are the beautiful humans behind that Netlify data team who really are challenging the norms on how most data teams are run. And I think that if this were a panel and they were all up here with me today, what they would say is that while experimentation is a part of what data teams do, it's not the only thing or even the core thing. And so our job titles should be a reflection of the skills we have, not the domain of work we do for the business. So instead of ambiguous titles like data scientist, I propose that we use these core 4 roles. And this is a lot of information on a screen, so let's look at a simplified version of it. Data engineers move data from outside of your ecosystem in. Analytics engineers work with data within your ecosystem. Data analysts present insights and analyses to your stakeholders. And machine learning engineers build and productionize machine learning models. Now, if you've ever interviewed with me, you'll know that I say I'm hiring for floor sweepers. This is someone who is not going to be afraid to take out the trash if that's what needs to be done in the moment, or sweep the floor, or whatever it is. We all have to be willing to do whatever work needs to be done. But the question here is, does your title reflect the kind of work that you're doing most of the time? And I've written about these core 4 roles before on the Writing Analytics job description section of the Analytics Engineering Guide. But what it comes down to is we should organize our roles this way because instead of dividing people on whether they do or don't work on experiments or how well recruiters do or don't understand the jobs they're asking of people, job titles should be reflective of the work we're asking people to do. And so this is the 5 kinds of work your data team does. And in the same way, experimentation is just a piece of it. We shouldn't have a person who's only on experimentation. In the same way, we wouldn't have someone just to manage our operational analytics things. So let's do that thing that teen magazines do, where it's if you select A, your result is this. If your first data hire will use UI-based EL tools and manage Snowflake permissions end-to-end and be responsible for your data warehouse design, you should call them an analytics engineer. If your first data hire will write custom ETL to support custom data sources, occasionally implement custom event tracking into your application, or be responsible for your data warehouse design, you should call them a data engineer. If your first data hire will be 100% focused on surfacing business insights, you are setting them up for failure because there are other things that need to happen first. And so the way that a lot of organizations end up with this data science hire is that they know they need data, but they don't know what that means. And so they just go with like big data science because it sounds like the right combination of buzzwords. But this should be a flag to us as data professionals. And so maybe you're sitting there right now thinking like, Emilie, I know what my job is, and I have the title of data scientist. So what does it matter that it's not clear to other people? I talk to a lot of people about careers, like a lot of people about data careers. And a lot of them have this rough path. You come in, you get your first job, things are going well, you get that intermediate title, and then a couple years later, you get promoted to senior. Congratulations, crushing it, so happy for you. And then you're posed with this decision. Do I want to go to the management route, or do I want to go the technical individual contributor route? And if you make that technical individual contributor role in data, that's it, right? What comes next? I don't know, you die, right? Like your career is, that's it. And I know people are like, no, they're principal and fellow or whatever the next level is. But honestly, have you ever actually seen a principal data analyst in the wild? Like, really? If you have, let me know because I'm all ears. And in fact, I did what any good data person does, and I tried to get some data about this. So I asked LinkedIn, how many principal data analysts are there? And LinkedIn said 1,600. And I said, thank you very much, LinkedIn. But I really had no context. Is 1,600 a lot? Is 1,600 a little? So I said, LinkedIn, how many analytics engineers are there? And LinkedIn said, Emilie, there are 6 times more analytics engineers than there are principal data analysts. 6 times more analytics engineers than there are principal data analysts. It seems to me like the principal data analyst is more of a unicorn than all these tech unicorns. The analytics engineering job title didn't even exist until a couple of years ago, and people have been data analysts for a long time. And so what we're saying to folks is, yeah, you can get to the staff level, but then your career is dead. You cannot grow. And in fact, if we look at what's happening, we see that people are recognizing that, and they leave data. They move into chief of staff or biz ops or finance roles. They move on from our data organization. But we absolutely cannot attrit our best talent if we're going to lead and have the kinds of organizations we want. Yesterday, Tristan Handy and Julia Schottenstein and Martine Casado, in their conversation about how big this wave is, were saying really big. I'd encourage you to go catch up the session. But folks, I'm going to be really frank here. If we attrit our best talent, we are handicapping this wave. We cannot have our best talent feel that there is no career opportunities in data if we're going to make the difference and create the impact that we want to have. So here's my proposal. We need to create career ladders for each of the core 4 roles that includes a path for technical mastery. Data cannot be management or settle for staff. We have to create opportunities for technical mastery. And I'm not the first data person to talk about careers in data. Caitlin Moorman has a 3-part series on Locally Optimistic published on why you need a career ladder and how to use it. I would definitely encourage you to go give it a read. My point here today is that data scientist is a bad job title and data science is a bad descriptor because it's highly unspecific and not reflective of the majority of the work being done by data teams. It's important to align job titles to skills development and career progression on a team and not the type of problem being solved or the tool you're using. This is why things like LookML developer or Tableau analyst are also bad job titles. We need to create opportunities for technical mastery careers for each of the core 4 roles, especially data analysts. And hopefully, you're sitting or standing at your desk and nodding. Yes, this makes sense. You see this problem in your org, and maybe it even feels like this conversation has been happening in the zeitgeist for a little bit. And I think it's because we have. So in mid-November, Ben Stansel wrote about the missing analytics executive for his Substack. And then around the same time, he recorded an episode of The Sequel Show with Boris Joubert where he had the same conversation. I think actually the podcast inspired the Substack. And then back in October, Steph Olofsdottir of Avo and Lori Voss of Netlify had a similar conversation where they talked about how companies often use this data scientist job title as a crutch. And then just last week, Not So Standard Deviations, hosted by Roger Pang and Hillary Parker, had a really interesting take on this, where someone from the audience sent in a letter, and what they said in this letter was like, hey, my current job title is data scientist, and excuse me, but I do all these other things in my job. Like, what should my job title actually be? And Hillary says, don't veer from data science as a job title because it does pay more than other job titles. And the more you can keep the air of mystique around what you do, the more you'll get paid. And the sad fact is that this is 100% true. This is totally true. Data scientists make more money than a lot of their other data peers. But this is optimizing for the short-term salary bump, and instead, we should really focus on solving the problems with why there's this ambiguity and this air of mystique in the first place. And this is still a conversation that is happening. The Analytics Engineering podcast in September had an episode with Tristan Handy, Julia Schottenstein, and Caitlin Colgrove, where they talked. One of the things that came up was how data analysts are seen as less respected than software engineers. And then just a couple of weeks ago in the Analytics Engineering Roundup, Tristan wrote about the future of analytics in companies and how we're actually going to see a big dispersion of analytical skills. And then the subsequent Analytics Engineering Roundup, Anna wrote about how there are 6-ish jobs to be done in data. And I think what all of these conversations come to, what talking about the types of work that your data team does, what all of this is getting to is that we want to elevate the data profession. We know that our orgs can be more impactful to the business. And one of the ways we do that is by removing the ambiguity of this data science thing, title, language, descriptor, and this data scientist job title that goes with it. If we're going to level up the impact that we have to the business, this starts by leveling up the clarity and the organization that we have when we talk amongst ourselves. So hopefully your head is still nodding. This is all making sense. You're on board with me. And now you're like, so what do I do about it? It would be hard to have this conversation candidly if we didn't also recognize that people like the data scientist branding. Data analysts are often seen as lowly number fetchers, and data science has this aura mystique, and so it's seen as prestigious. And usually data scientists get paid more. But if you want to make a difference here, I think that there's a lot that we can do, not just if you have this data scientist title. But first, across the board, get clarity on your title, independent of what it is. Catalog the work you're doing for your organization for a milestone or two. Which of the 5 categories of work are taking up the most of your time? And then reflect not just on the work you are doing, but on the kind of work you want to be doing. If you're going to have a conversation about careers with your manager, it's important that you know what you are doing and make sure your title reflects that, but also that you have a plan to help you get to more of the work you want to be doing. Go ahead and share with your manager and team members why you're spending time understanding what job titles actually mean. And if that means you want to borrow these slides to use as the foundation for a lunch and learn, shoot me an email. I'm happy to help make that happen. Finally, work with your manager to adjust your title with your HR org. And how this plays out is actually going to be really specific to you and your organization. But having candid conversations can help shape what that process looks like. The other thing we can all do is remember to elevate data analysis. So, the engineering part of what we do can seem really attractive. It can be trendy, but recognize that insights come from many types of work, not just experimentation. And then also amplify and share the insights that you or a team member of yours is finding throughout your organization. There's a great blog post from August by staff data analyst at Netlify, Paige Berry, on how to share your data insights to engage your colleagues. Next, we can elevate data practitioners together. So Sarah, who I work with here at Amplify, has this wonderful tweet thread on the importance of bringing data practitioners to the boardroom. But there's a lot more. There are a lot of other rooms besides just the boardroom. So create opportunities for data practitioners to be in the room where the decisions are made, but also create opportunities for them to be doing proactive work. Help break teams out of that service trap. And finally, remember that data people should report to data people. And this graphic comes from a really phenomenal blog post by Eric Bernhardsen. But remember that data people are just as entitled to managers who understand their job as the rest of the organization. And if you want to see or hear about a team that's doing this really well, I would encourage catching up on Erica Louie's talk from yesterday. Scaling knowledge is greater than scaling bodies. So we've done it. Hopefully you're all convinced this data scientist job title has got to go. I want to take a second before we move into questions to recognize that while I might be up here giving this talk today, this is really a conversation that I've been having with the community for many months. When I first wrote this proposal for Coalesce 6 or 7 months ago, it was an idea with a couple of pages scribbled out. But this talk is the culmination of many conversations I've had with people since. I'm glad to see that a conversation around data careers is so front and center right now. A lot of people like to talk about tools are trendy and companies building those tools are really cool, but tools are nothing if we don't center the people using those tools in our conversations. So let's keep this conversation going. Please do let me know what you think in Slack. But I think we're going to bring Anna up here and we can jump into some questions.
Thank you so much. That was so much fun. And I know you can't see the Slack right now, but it is blowing up with nodding emojis. Folks are absolutely loving this. Let's start with a question from Amanda. And Amanda says, the most important question is, where can she get a neon data light sign like yours?
Etsy, just ordered it off Etsy. I can find the exact shop I used and send it to you in Slack later.
Awesome. Okay, serious question. Dave of Jack Connor's fame yesterday wants to know. Dave says, I feel like we've seen a lot of analysts move into analytics engineering because currently leveling up in analytics seems more synonymous with gaining technical expertise.
Mm-hmm.
How do you envision leveling up for analysts without moving into the AE lane?
Great question. I think this is actually a scope of influence question. So when people talk about like manager, director, senior director, and then VP, at the manager level, you influence your team. And then at the director level, you influence your department. And VPs influence the whole company, right? Excuse me. And I think the leveling up for data analysts needs to be thought about in a lot of the same way. So for a data analyst, maybe you're supporting a pod and then, or really advising a pod and surfacing insights that affect that pod. Excuse me. But then as you move from senior to staff and up and above, at some point, and this is what Ben Stansel gets to in that chief analytics officer, is that chief analytics officer is really like the data analyst who most closely surfaces insights to the CEO and is really driving things that change the company perception. I think we have to try it out and we have to create paths where we're going to do this and get it wrong a little bit, but in the process of getting it wrong, we're going to get it right.
I love that. The journey is very much not done yet. We're still in this together, and there's still much more learning to do. Related to this, a question from Emily. Emily says, one separation between data analyst and data scientist I've seen is technical tools they use, which is something you mentioned in your talk earlier. BI tools, Tableau, Excel, maybe SQL versus R and Python. If we do away with the data scientist title, do we need to differentiate within data analyst somehow based on this?
No, we need to decide what tools our teams are using. So if you're going to be using, when I first joined Netlify, we had some people who liked R and some people who liked Python. And one of the first things I did was say, we're not going to support both. And the reason for that is because when your org is like this big, it is very hard to support multiple languages. Maybe only one person knows R and then they leave, or only one person knows Python and then they leave. And now there's all this stuff to maintain. It is very hard to support a lot of tools or languages that are for the same purpose. So I think as an org, you decide what your right tooling is, and then everyone on your team uses that tool. And whether that's an org that is comfortable with both Python and SQL, or R and SQL, or R and Python, or whatever it might be, I'm not going to dictate your tooling to you. But that seems like an artificial way to break down who is doing what.
Thank you for that. Guillaume wants to know, and specifically says, yes, exclamation mark. Bringing data practitioners to the rooms where decisions are made is what we should do. However, how do you make that happen when it's definitely not anchored culturally speaking?
Yeah, it's a hard problem, and I won't say it's not or pretend it's not. In a lot of ways, the way we get data people in the room is that we get people who see the value of data in those rooms to bring us in. And I think one of the best ways to do this isn't to try to go really wide and shallow in who you as the data team work with, but instead to serve a few stakeholders very well. And find an executive or a department that you can really understand the problems that you can help them with, and let them see the value of the data team, earn that goodwill, be useful. And then when you say, hey, can I actually get an invite to that meeting so that we don't have to play telephone afterwards? They will be much more amenable to that ask because they've already seen the value of you and your team.
One question for you back on career tracks and career progression. Stephen is asking, is this a natural progression of a field? As a field evolves, does it just naturally become more specialized? Is that what's happening here? Or is there something special and different about data roles?
Good question. This is one I've been thinking a lot to myself too. So I work with a lot of earlier stage companies, and they're like, a lot of times people, their interaction, non-data data stakeholders in those companies their previous interactions with the data team is primarily with data analysts. So when they come into these earlier stage companies, they say, we need to hire a bunch of data analysts, and they don't understand the bigger picture. I think part of the blame here is on us as data people not doing a great job helping other people understand the challenges of our roles. And yeah, there's some level of just like maturity of data and clearer definitions and an efficiency that we're going for by defining the roles this way. But there's also some level of this is work that needs to get done, and we haven't done a great job of explaining that to people or communicating that to people. Yeah.
Questions just keep pouring in. Keep them coming, folks. Gregor says that they've only worked in small companies so far and have never thought about talking to HR about the name of their job. They just put whatever they thought fit in the moment into their email signature and on their LinkedIn. Is there anything wrong with that?
Titles matter because they help communicate expectations. And what I mean by that is your title matters to you because it helps people understand, helps other people in your org understand how to interact with you. You know that you've got someone in HR because their title tells you that they're in HR. And so if you have a question about your salary, you might go to the person in HR. Or if you have a question about your payroll, you might look through your org chart and say, who's got payroll in their job title? So job titles matter because they help us understand how to navigate our organization. That's like an internal use case. But there's also an external use case here that, like, I'm really glad that you're happy at your current job and you're planning on staying there, and maybe you don't care that much about your title now. But I've interviewed a lot of people in the last year, like a lot of people. And a lot of candidates come to me with this data scientist job title. And my first question to them is, so what does data science mean to you? And the vast majority will say something of, oh, I'm a data analyst. My company just calls it data science. And yeah, why not just call it what it is? We want everyone in the org to know what customers means. We want everyone in the org to know what revenue means. And so we need everyone in the org to understand what a data analyst versus an analytics engineer versus a data engineer is. And this ambiguous title of data scientist, or whatever your title might be, being more exact with it is going to be able to communicate internally and externally the kind of work you're doing.
Got a really related question to what we're talking about, so I'll just jump into it. I've heard of defining a data science team of a small group of analysts, engineers, rather than hiring a data scientist to do everything in companies before. Do you think data science will become a team rather than a single role?
I think we should just call it data teams. There's a lot more, if we think about that definition of science, there's a lot more beyond just science and experimentation that data teams are doing. So I think data is a better umbrella term than data science. There are companies with a lot of data science teams, and almost always, in my experience, those teams are a collection of people with the data scientist job title. And so it's possible, but I think that's still too ambiguous, and we would be better off just having data teams.
What do you think about the term decision science or data intelligence?
Yeah. So I am not a fan of the business intelligence term. We'll start there. I'm not a fan of the business intelligence term because it feels like business intelligence, or so I've seen like business intelligence analyst, business intelligence engineer, and it feels like people with this business intelligence title, really they're just like glorified dashboard builders, and that term just has a lot of baggage with it at this point, and I'm not sure that's a great branding for us either. Decision science is an interesting one because it helps, like this inclusion of the word decision helps us think about what the goal here is, which is really driving to a decision as quickly as possible, helping the org make better decisions. And so I'm more okay with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it becomes weird when you have a team of like data engineers, analytics engineers, and decision scientists. And I'd probably ask, like, how much science are they really doing? If you're just getting or updating revenue numbers, are you doing decision science? I think what we're better off doing is leveling up, or more clearly articulating and showcasing the value of folks with that data analyst title. rather than rebranding. But if what it takes to get people in the room, if what it takes to have the impact we need to get data analysts the salary they deserve is that we have to rebrand it to decision analysts or decision drivers, or analytics translators is another one I've seen.
I like translators. Callum wants to know, and I think this is actually really important to talk about in this context. So when you remove data scientists as a role in a data team, does the analyst swallow all their skills and responsibilities? How can we distinguish between analysts who are focused on dashboarding and reporting and those who conduct more deep dive analysis, modeling, machine learning, regressions, etc.?
There's a lot in that question. So let's start with, where do these responsibilities go? And I'd start with saying that probably those responsibilities already fall into one of the other core 4 roles that I've laid out. So if they're building machine learning models, the responsibilities go to the machine learning engineers. If they're building dashboards or reporting, those responsibilities go to the data analysts. If they're building out DBT models, those responsibilities go to the analytics engineers. And so most of those responsibilities already exist in your organization. It's a question of where they land if you're following this core 4 roles framework. The second part of the question, I remember there was a second part, but Anna, maybe you can come off mute and repeat the second part there because it escaped me.
Yeah, you got it. The second part is, how do we distinguish between analysts who are focused on dashboarding and reporting and those who conduct more deep dive analyses, modeling, machine learning, and regressions?
Yeah, we'll take machine learning out of the picture there for a second because I talked about where that's going to land. But the rest, I mean, if you think it's important to differentiate, you put a comma after their job title and you say that. So data analyst, comma, regression, or data analyst, comma, dashboard. But the reality is that, or for the vast majority of orgs, what we need is people who are able to do that whole breadth, the whole breadth of work. And so you might build a dashboard today and then you might run a regression tomorrow. We shouldn't say these are the only things that belong to a data analyst. We should be making it easier for data analysts to do the most impactful work to the organization, and then make it as easy as possible for other people to do the lower level or not necessarily the responsibilities that should belong only to the data team.
I love that. There are a couple of questions on hiring, and I'm going to try and summarize them because they both have the same underlying theme. There's a lot of leverage that you've talked about in calling someone a data scientist. As a hiring manager, why would I throw that away? And if let's say I'm bought in, okay, I'm not going to hire data scientists anymore. How do I attract talent?
I think the idea of the data scientist job title should be a flag to people at this point. It's ambiguous. Nobody knows what it means. And so if I were looking for a job, I wouldn't want the data scientist job title. It's like saying I'm okay with things that are confusing in an org that doesn't understand what they're asking me to do. And so as data practitioners, we should actually want more exacting titles. The other side of that as a hiring manager is that I have this spiel that I go on when I interview people. And I always say, I think 80% of the world's problems are expectation mismanagement. So we're going to set some ground rules for this interview. And I think, hey, I'm getting your job title right is the ultimate expectation management. It's saying, here's what I need you to do to be successful. Here are the skills that I expect you to have. And aligning on that with the candidate before they even apply is the clearest way to make sure that you're both aligned on what the goals of this role are.
Will has a question about experimentation. You mentioned earlier in your talk that a lack of experimentation is one of the things that is a problem right now with folks who are employed as data scientists. Is your only qualm with the role of data scientist the lack of experimentation in the job description? And if experimentation is part of the role, is it okay to have a data scientist?
No, because we wouldn't have a operational analytics scientist, right? Like we wouldn't have a data operational analytics analyst. We shouldn't give people titles that are about the kind of work we're doing. We give people titles based on the kinds of skills they need. You have a front end software engineer and a back end engineer, not like the person who updates the about page. Like, it's a silly title because it doesn't mean anything, because there's not a standard to the org. It's not necessarily that it's only about experimentation. It's that if science is experimentation and data science is running experimentation, the fact that this job is not primarily doing that means that the title doesn't make a lot of sense in a lot of ways. And even where that is the primary responsibility of the individual, there are other kinds of work that we ask them to do. And so we shouldn't give them a title that's about this tiny sliver of the impact they have on the organization. There are so many other ways that people get insights, not just experimentation.
We have time for one more question, and this is a long one, so I'll try and summarize.
Okay.
Kyle is asking, how can we convince analyst-focused data roles to separate themselves from data scientists, especially when data scientists will be paid more, even if their function is exactly the same? You also mentioned that organizations view analysis work as less valuable, hence the pay. So do the analysts take one for the data team, as they always do?
This really falls on leadership. It's on folks like me who, when presented with that split in the road to go the senior technical individual contributor route or go the manager route, and they chose management, this is on us to fix. We have the power here. And the answer is we have to fight for the comp bands for our data analysts that is reflective of the impact that our data analysts have to the company. On the other side of it, we all need to be emphasizing the impact that data analysts have. So highlight those insights that they're finding, share it widely, not just within the data team. Ensure that data practitioners are getting in the room as often as they can, and have data people report to data people. The only way that we have the movement that we need is if we have data organizations being impactful to the impactful to the larger company.